The phone lights up on the table. You know the name before you even look. 6 months ago, you would have answered immediately. A year ago, you might have answered at 2 in the morning. You were the person who listened, explained, forgave, calmed things down, gave one more chance, and told yourself that good people do not abandon people they love. But tonight, you watch the screen vibrate until it goes dark. Then something strange happens. You do not feel guilty. You do not feel lonely. You feel your body loosen. The room becomes quieter, even though nothing in the room has changed. And that relief can be almost frightening, because it forces a question most people avoid. How exhausted do you have to become before someone's absence feels safer than their presence? People who cut others off are often described with simple words: cold, avoidant, dramatic, heartless, strong, boundaried. But none of those words explains the psychology. Because two people can delete the same number, stop answering the same messages, and walk away with completely different internal reasons. One is ending a relationship that repeatedly violated trust. Another is escaping the discomfort that appears whenever intimacy becomes real. One is protecting peace. Another is protecting a wound from ever being touched again. From the outside, both doors are closed. The important question is what the door is protecting. For many people, the story begins with years of over-availability, answering, mediating, absorbing, and quietly becoming responsible for everyone else's emotional weather. Imagine growing up in a home where the atmosphere could change depending on one person's mood. You learn to check the face before the words. The door closes harder than usual. Dinner is quieter. Someone answers with one syllable. Before anyone tells you something is wrong, your body already knows. A child in that environment may become remarkably good at reading other people, not because they were taught emotional intelligence, but because prediction reduced uncertainty. The event is tension. The past experience is that another person's mood can change what happens next. The belief becomes, if I notice the shift early enough, I may be able to prevent the damage. The protective reaction is monitoring. The adult behavior becomes sensitivity, caretaking, conflict management, and eventually, exhaustion. But repeated inconsistency changes the nervous system's relationship with the connection. The message notification stops feeling neutral. It begins carrying the memory of previous demands. The person's name appears on the screen, and the body prepares before the conversation even begins. This is the central metaphor. Every relationship has an invisible access badge. Closeness opens doors to time, attention, vulnerability, and forgiveness. But access is not ownership. This is where some people finally change. They realize they have been treating access as irreversible. Once someone was close, that person could keep entering the house psychologically, even after repeatedly making the house unsafe. Cutting someone off becomes the moment the badge stops working, and the relief can be enormous. Silence returns. That silence can feel like peace because the person's attention is no longer being rented out by someone else's instability. But this is where the flattering version of the story becomes dangerous. Relief alone does not prove that the cutoff was healthy. Avoidance also produces relief. The nervous system often rewards escape immediately, even when escape creates a smaller life later. So, I felt better when I cut them off, is important information, but it is not the entire verdict. The deeper question is what becomes possible after the distance. Does the person become more open, stable, and present with healthier relationships? Or does every close relationship eventually begin to feel like the same threat? That distinction separates a boundary from a pattern of disappearance. A boundary says, this specific behavior cannot continue having access to me. A wall says, closeness itself is dangerous. A boundary can be selective. A wall does not need evidence. It only needs the possibility of pain. Then a new person performs the first step of an old sequence, and the brain rushes to complete the pattern. Sometimes it is right. Sometimes it is predicting the past more accurately than it is perceiving the present. The early warning system becomes so sensitive that smoke and fire start looking identical. The same internal system that protects them can overprotect them. That is why the psychology of cutting people off cannot be reduced to trust your gut or give everyone another chance. Both slogans ignore the difficult middle. There is another reason some people eventually disappear from relationships. They never learned how to express smaller boundaries before reaching the final one. They absorb disappointment quietly until the final boundary arrives as disappearance. Then one day the door closes completely. From the outside, the cutoff seems sudden. Internally, It may be the final page of a book the other person did not know was being written. The person does not say, "This relationship needs to change." They wait until something inside them says, "I need to leave." And because the departure comes after months or years of invisible accumulation, they may feel almost nothing when it happens. The grief occurred while the relationship still existed. This is why some people seem shockingly calm after cutting someone off. Calm does not necessarily mean they never cared. Sometimes it means they cared for so long without repair that the attachment exhausted itself. But there is a darker reversal. Cutting people off can become an identity. The word peace becomes powerful because it sounds unquestionably healthy. But a life without disturbance is not automatically a peaceful life. Sometimes it is a controlled one. If protecting my peace means nobody is allowed to frustrate, challenge, disappoint, or misunderstand me, peace has quietly become isolation with good branding. This is the midpoint reversal. The ability to walk away can be a sign of self-respect, but needing to walk away from everyone can be evidence that the threat system has taken over relationship selection. The strongest person is not the one who keeps every door open. It is also not the one who permanently locks doors at the first sign of discomfort. Strength is being able to distinguish danger from difficulty, exploitation from imperfection, and a repeated pattern from a single human failure. That distinction is psychologically expensive because it requires remaining present long enough to gather evidence without abandoning yourself in the process. The middle territory feels unfamiliar. The middle contains a sentence like, "I care about you, but I cannot keep doing this." In that middle, the person learns something more difficult than cutting someone off. Closeness does not require unlimited access. Love and access are not identical. You can care about someone and stop participating in a destructive pattern. Compassion explains behavior. It does not automatically renew the badge. Another clue is how the person reacts after the cutoff. If distance creates enough stability for them to become more honest with healthier people, the separation may have restored capacity rather than reduced it. They start answering messages without dread. They stop rehearsing every conversation. They no longer need to monitor the room for emotional weather. Their attention returns to work, sleep, hobbies, and relationships that do not require constant repair. But if the peace depends on nobody getting close enough to create uncertainty, the nervous system has not learned safety. It has learned distance. That can feel identical at first because both produce quiet. The difference appears later. One form of quiet becomes spacious. The other becomes fragile. It can only survive if nothing unexpected enters. And that is why a small circle can be healthy without becoming a sealed one. Selectivity says access must be earned. Isolation says access itself is the danger. This also changes the meaning of solitude. Loneliness is not simply being alone, and solitude is not automatically emotional health. That solitude can be restorative because space returns the self to the center of its own attention. But restorative solitude eventually increases the capacity for chosen connection. Defensive isolation usually does the opposite. The longer it lasts, the more demanding any future closeness feels. Healthy solitude says, "I can be alone without abandoning relationships." Defensive isolation says, "I can only feel safe when nobody can reach me." Again, the room looks identical. The internal direction is different. Because if no one gets close enough to hurt you, no one gets close enough to know you either. Protection can eventually protect the wound from healing. Return to the phone from the beginning. The name appears again. Months ago, you would have answered before the second ring. Tonight, you let it fade. Maybe that is the right decision. But the meaning of that silence is not simply, "I chose myself." The deeper question is what you choose next. Do you use the quiet to become more unreachable or more discerning? Do you turn one person's broken access badge into a permanent lockdown? Or do you finally learn that trust can have doors, locks, conditions, and still remain trust? People who cut others off are not necessarily cold. They are not necessarily healed either. Sometimes they are exhausted caretakers, learning that love without limits becomes self-erasure. Sometimes they are frightened people, discovering that disappearance feels easier than repair. Sometimes they are both at once. The psychology is not in the closed door. It is in whether the person behind it still believes a safe door can open again. Because peace is not the absence of people. It is the absence of relationships that require you to abandon yourself in order to keep them. And the final form of protection may not be learning how to cut everyone off. It may be learning that the right people do not need unlimited access to stay close.